Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. It's a pleasure to have as my guest Wally Chappell, the director of Hancher Auditorium. Hancher is known locally, statewide, and nationally as a place to enjoy dance, chamber music, symphonies, jazz, world beat offerings, musicals, and much more. With Wally's leadership and vision, Hancher has achieved global recognition through its national and international commissioning projects and its leadership in the development of commissioning networks. Not only is Hancher well known nationally and internationally, so is Wally Chappell. He was elected and served 2 years as president of the International Society of Performing Arts Administrators. As the Global Organization of Arts Administrators, ISPA has a membership of more than 750 administrators of art facilities and organizations in 65 countries on 6 continents. He is a member of the prestigious Stage Society of Directors and Choreographers, Rotary International, and the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. Born in Dallas, Texas in 1941, Wally was involved from the beginning with theater, journalism, and public relations, thanks in part to the influence of his parents. Wally received a BA in English, philosophy, and art history from Dartmouth, and an MFA from the East-West Center, University of Hawaii, and did graduate work at the University of Minnesota, the Royal Fine Arts Institute of Bangkok, and the Sophia University in Tokyo. Perhaps some of you don't know that before coming to Iowa City, Wally had a 17-year career as a professional stage director at such well-known places as the Mark Taper Forum, the O'Neill Memorial Theater, the Long Wharf Theater, and the Denver Center Theater Company. He served as artistic director of the Denver Center Theater Company, the Repertory Theater of St. Louis, and associate artistic director of the Alliance Theater in Atlanta. Wally's job as the director of Hancher involves education, marketing, fundraising, and programming. But programming for him is his most important part of his job. Under Wally's leadership, Hancher has commissioned more than 49 new works from such companies as Bill T. Jones, the Cronus Quartet, Joffrey, Mark Morris, Christopher Hogwood, Susan Marshall and Company, and many more. In 1996, he was awarded the Dawson Award for Programmatic Excellence from the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. Besides being administrator, Wally finds time to teach and occasionally direct. He also is a frequent speaker, panelist, and site visitor for numerous arts and community organizations. Wally's career has spanned acting, producing, directing, presenting, fundraising, all high-stress vocations. The steadying force and major influence in his life is his wife, Karen. Karen Chappell is the director of the International Center at the University of Iowa. Welcome to the Performing Arts Center, this fabulous auditorium, Wally.
Thanks, Ella.
I know your story begins in Dallas, and I was privileged to know your mother and father. Tell me just a bit about them and their influence on you.
Well, my folks' influence was complete. You know, my mother was acting. My grandmother ran a speech and drama school in Dallas for 52 years. Dallas Academy of Speech and Drama. So I never had a chance to do anything else. I mean, it was predestined, preordained, genetic, you name it. I played Jesus at the age of 6 months in the Passion play, and from then on I was just acting constantly. And my dad, I think he had a wonderful speaking voice, but he was a quiet man, but he was kind of dragged along by his mother and his wife, and was frequently appeared in plays just to go along with the family.
So when you went off to high school, it was, you were acting, I mean, you entered that field in high school then.
Sure, although actually all through my, my youth I was making commercials and doing television shows and industrials and getting paid for it. So really up until probably my mid-20s, I was really focused on acting.
Did you think that might be your vocation?
I thought so. You know, it's funny, I didn't take a lot of things very seriously. I always knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to have a good time, like a lot of young college guys do. So I didn't worry too much about career, really, until I got to Los Angeles. I did a good bit of acting there. Nothing that I'm particularly proud of, but I did stay busy and I did pay the bills. But I was looking for something more, and that more was directing.
When you were at Dartmouth, did you act at Dartmouth?
Oh yeah, I played the lead in a lot of shows, particularly in the Hopkins Center that opened the new Arts Center. It was then new in 1963. I played Danton in Danton's Death. And in the audience were Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy and John Huston and Montgomery Clift and Ina Balin and of the Yale Drama School, who had talked with my teachers and knew I had done a little directing, and I had applied as an actor. And he came up to me after the performance and said, "Wally, Yale would be happy to accept you as a director, but not as an actor." And I said, "To hell with you," and went off to Los Angeles. Of course, what did I do with the rest of my life? Be a director. So he knew something.
He knew something.
Yeah.
Oh, but at Dartmouth, you got, besides acting, you got very interested in Asian studies.
Yeah, I had a couple of wonderful teachers, Ellen. One was a man named Robert Poor, who really was a Chinese bronzes and landscape teacher, very knowledgeable, and ran the local art museum there too. And I got fascinated not only with the art forms, but also with the religion that backs up the cultural aesthetic, the religious aesthetic, if you will, that backs up these artworks. And then my teacher in theater history was a wonderful man named Henry Williams. He was also directed me a lot, particularly in the plays of Samuel Beckett. We did several of those together very successfully. But he was a nut on kabuki theater, and he got me real excited. And I saw this grant. I just read it in one of these catalogs, and with the aid of a counselor there, applied for it and spent 2.5 years studying Oriental theater in Hawaii and then in Japan, Thailand, and Indonesia.
At the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii.
Right.
This is where this happened, and this is where you met your wife.
Well, Karen was also a grantee at the International Center, East-West Center. She was going to go into the Foreign Service with the State Department, and read and wrote and spoke Japanese, had studied international politics and Asian history in particular. So we actually met in the Los Angeles airport as a number of grantees were going off to Hawaii to study. And we had a great time in Hawaii together. We hooked up right away. And then she went on to Japan and I went on to Bangkok, and we didn't like that separation very much. So at the end of her study tour, she came to Bangkok, and we got married 2 weeks later.
There's a wonderful picture you brought that will be edited in the show,
right.
The two of you. And that was at the time of your marriage?
Right. In January of 1965, we got hitched, and it was in a Thai folk ceremony in Buddhist style. And I lived with a major general in the Thai army who was part of the Queen's Guard and was in charge of the borders around Thailand, which was kind of an interesting challenge at that time, and still is. And he threw us a terrific wedding. We had Thai movie stars there. Photographers were much more interested in the Thai movie stars than they were in us.
Too.
But it was a wonderful memory.
What a wonderful story. Well, okay, you're there in the Orient. What brought you back to L.A. to direct?
Well, we had to come back to Hawaii to finish our master's degrees, which was part of the hook of the grant. And we came back and spent another 6 months or so. And I got a part as an actor in the movie of Hawaii, right when I came back from Asia, just almost by a fluke. It was.
What'd you play?
I played missionary number 6. It was an august role, I can assure you, but it did give me membership in the Screen Actors Guild. It paid extremely well to a young graduate student.
Can we rent it?
You could rent the movie Hawaii, particularly the longer director's cut, but I'd have to sit by your side and say, oh.
That's the missionary number
6. That's
me.
right. Right, but we had a ball with it. It was partly shot in Hawaii, but partly at Goldwyn Studios in Hollywood. So I had a good time, and the money that I made from that paid pretty much for 2 years of graduate school after that.
Which
so
was?
That was very fortunate at the University of Minnesota. And,
but you didn't. You quit after a couple years, or not quit. You
well,
decided to go a different way.
I was very eager to get out of school and try my wings professionally as an actor. So
not a director yet.
Right. I did finish all the coursework and the final exams. I even did the oral exams. So it was ABD is a pretty recognized degree these days. It just simply means without the thesis, which I actually still have all the research on, but I'm sure I'll never finish it now. But we went off to Los Angeles. Karen's parents were there, and I got working right away as an actor. But I got kind of bored with it.
Did you?
Yeah, I moved into stage managing. The first show I stage managed was with Elaine May as director. So I was very lucky. And then I turned around, and then I was hired as a staff director at the Mark Taper Forum in a kind of pilot program they had with the National Endowment for the Arts to train young directors. And actually Gordon Davidson, the artistic director of the Taper, still saw me direct a play called Indians by Arthur Kopit at UCLA, where I was teaching at the time. So that's how that connection was made.
And you were out, then you went to Atlanta. I mean, this is not chronologically, but you've been kind of all over in the Midwest.
Well, the life of a director is peripatetic. To make a living, either freelance or working for a specific theater, you got to direct 4, 5, 6 shows a year, which is exhausting. And I was doing it, as you suggest, all over. I think the most interesting theaters that I worked in, aside from the Mark Taper in LA, were the Long Wharf Theater in New Haven, which is a fine theater, the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, the Honolulu Theater for Youth, which is really probably one of my favorite memories of all. So we went back about 10 years later after graduate school, Karen worked for the State Foundation for Cultural and the Arts, like the Iowa Arts Council here. And I ran this youth-oriented theater that toured the Outer Islands every year, and that was great fun.
So I know you came to Iowa City from St. Louis. What went into the decision to, I mean, this is 17 years now as a stage director, and it was a pretty rich life. I mean, exciting and varied. The downside of it is that it does tend to be so peripatetic. You don't have roots, you don't have a home that's a stable place, and we had moved around a lot, and I always have enjoyed teaching and have done it off and on really all through my life since I felt qualified to teach anything. The University of Iowa's theater department is why I came here, to be the head of the directing and acting program. So that's really what drew me. I didn't know so much about Hansher at that point. I knew it existed, I'd heard of it, but the theater department here was known for the playwrights workshop, and I of course have heard of the Writers' Workshop as a great appreciator, particularly of fiction, American fiction. So it looked like an interesting thing to do, but nothing is forever in an artist's construct, you know. So we just thought we'd try it out. I didn't. When I first met you, I didn't think you would stay too long in Iowa City, but then Hansher they offered you the Hansher directorship, and
I was actually asked to be the interim director for about 6 months, and I was in the second year of a 3-year contract with the theater department, and I said, "Oh, okay." You know, and why not? And actually, some aspects of the business of Hansher, we call presenting, are really quite similar to running a regional theater or being an artistic director or directing or producing. So that's been comparatively easy and fun for me. That's the fun part.
That's the fun part.
Right, is working with the artists and putting the shows on.
But when I look at this program, like for next year, you know you're asked this a lot, but goes into, I mean, what did you kind of learn as you went as a director? I mean, I know there's just practically a couple years go into 1 year programming of research.
Well, at least, if not a lifetime. And I always often think that the good thing about my job here at Hancher is that I can use almost everything I've ever learned or experienced. And how many people can really say that? So I'm really fortunate in a way. But sometimes I will have something recommended to me in the co-op at 7 a.m. in the morning, and maybe 6 years later I'll book it. I'm very conservative, actually, in my attachments with artists. I'm very careful. And nowadays I want to know that not only will they give a good performance on this stage, but also that they'll probably be real good in the community.
Teaching,
teaching,
classes.
Walking down the hall to the music department and playing with the jazz kids like Branford Marsalis did one afternoon, or appearing at Old Brick or in the local schools or all around eastern Iowa. And I think that side of our program is really developing, so that's exciting.
So you get, I mean, people tell you, suggest, and you put it back in your read-only memory and say, pull that out 6 years later, and then I know you travel a lot, you go to New York, and Chicago, and all over the world, globally, and you see performances. But there must be some other way, too, to know about. Well,
these conferences we have generally in New York, but and like I'm just back from one in Stockholm of my international society that you mentioned, are just beehives of networking and business. In some there's a resource room, like at all conventions of some specialty or another. And artists and managers and agents are constantly selling me their wares, both at these conferences and sitting at my desk. And now with, you know, internet and email and all of the good communications devices we have, I'm regularly in touch with people all over the world who want to come here.
What do you tell people when they say, Wally, you live in a town what size?
Yeah.
How do you get those performers to come in the program you have? What do you tell them?
Well, I still think it's a bit of a miracle. I have to be honest. I just, sometimes when I think of a town of 64,000, a county of 110,000, maybe 1 million people within a 2-hour drive, although not too many people will drive 2 hours because that puts them home pretty late, maybe on a Sunday afternoon, but generally not that far. More like an hour out is our sphere of interest. It gets to be quite a challenge sometimes, as you know, not only to fill up the hall with something that I think is really exciting. There's an awful lot of things I don't do these days because I don't think the size of the audience will justify their coming.
It must be a balance to keep or to strive for, because I know you like what's coming, what's in the future, what's and pushing people to look at things rather than always going to the past and
That's absolutely correct. And if I had a choice, I would probably be much more of a R&D center, research and development, much more sort of future-oriented. Certainly this Millennium Festival that we got coming up in 99, 2000 is really oriented towards the future of the arts. So we're going to make a real statement there.
But and that's exciting to you. That keeps your job interesting, doesn't it?
And I'm so glad that that idea came along. I'm not sure where it came along from. I think probably from my contacts with my European colleagues, because Europe has been working on celebrations for the millennium for 5 years, 10 years out. And America is just realizing, oh, there's going to be some New Year's Eve. I better find out where I'm going to go, and how are we going to celebrate that anyway?
So do you want to talk a little bit about what's coming on the millennium?
Oh, sure, sure. The anchor of it is December 31st, 1999. And there's this debate as to when the millennium is. I won't get into that. Anyway, we're having the party that night because the next day is January 1, 2000. And maybe your computers will go crazy, maybe they won't, but I think the arts will still be here. And I just want to reinforce the University of Iowa's role, which has been so significant, really for the last 50 years, since the Writers' Workshop began, since we were the first people to give graduate degrees in the creative arts and so on. I think Hancher is a natural growth from that idea. So and I feel very well supported in that. But so we're making a play, making a bet on the future of the arts. We'll have probably 10 commissions of new dance from ballet and modern, and also a Japanese company in a form called Buto, But Sankaijuku is well known here as well as around the world and very much respected. So we are the first American commissioner they've ever had. But Paul Taylor, Twyla Tharp, Susan Marshall, Alvin Ailey, the Joffrey Ballet. It's a wonderful list that's growing and changing and shrinking every day.
Do you have a slight bias for dance? You do, don't you? I mean, I don't mean that in a judgmental way.
Actually, no. Personally, no.
Oh.
My bias is to theater. But Hampshire, as you and I well know, because is a little too big for most spoken theater. We do fine for musical drama, musical comedy, so-called. But there isn't much theater on the road, and that's a sign of the times of our funding of the theater. And sometimes it would be better in maybe theater, which seats 500 seats. So there isn't as much theater. So that's my real first love and my surest knowledge, if I have any at all. I've discovered through this job a great latent love for chamber music. A string quartet, an association with Yo-Yo Ma, with Emanuel Axe, with Isaac Stern, Itzhak Perlman. Not only are they celebrities, but these are the great artists of our time. You know, Yo-Yo Ma is setting out on a program now for the next 5 to 10 years to examine the history of music as it was affected by the Silk Road, you know, through the Middle East into China and then back to Europe. And what a wonderful idea as musicians and instruments and music passed back and forth up and down this route. So I think a marvelous thing. So we're happy to be a part of that. That'll be part of our Millennium Push as well. And we're also doing a half a dozen commissions in chamber music. Some of them a little off the wall, which is fun.
Which is what you like.
Right.
I mean,
I
you
like
want to be able to push.
the real risk takers. I know Herb Wilson, who's a good friend in town, calls me a riverboat gambler with a garter on my sleeve, you know. But I think you got to take chances. And I think the real trick of running a place like this year after year is to keep the spark, to keep it exciting, to not be so predictable.
Because
that's death.
Death, predictability, and
Absolutely.
And there's another word you already say. It's the death, complacency.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Those two.
If that happens, then people aren't going to be so interested. And now there's so many other alternatives to live performance on your television set, on your internet. Video
CDs.
games have over 3 billion rentals a year of video games. So the competition is enormous right here in eastern Iowa for your time and attention and your money. So yes, we have to find a way to keep the spark going.
Do you think that's one of your perhaps finest strengths as a director and presenter, is that you have been managed to keep the spark going?
I've got a really good staff. I mean, people like Chuck Swanson and Judy Hertig and graphic designer Ron McClellan. Joel Alberts, Michelle Coleman really helped me, because they all have special interests and likes and dislikes too, and sometimes we have real battles about what we do, and that's good because I recognize that they represent various constituencies that come to Hampshire.
So you all don't think alike.
Oh heavens, no! I'm sure they would say absolutely
Let me
not.
know.
But so that's helpful to me, and I do have an advisory committee made up of faculty, staff, and students. I do have a Hampshire Guild of 250 people, and they're constantly giving me suggestions, and that's great. And if I'm doing my job, I'll listen. And it may be 6 years later, it may be never. And sometimes I very quickly have learned to say, well, gee, we can't afford that. Or, gee, I can't get them to Iowa City. I've tried. And that's a downside of the job when I can't get what I want.
Well, don't you think this magnificent auditorium is a draw, too, for performers? They like to come here,
well,
don't
they know we have good acoustics.
Okay.
That's most important to these gangs. Our pianos are in pretty good shape. And
tuned.
Vladimir Horowitz liked them, too.
Yeah.
So we have a reputation there. We also have a reputation for a listening, discerning audience. And that's very important to these people. They don't want their talents to be wasted. I have learned that over the years. More and more now we're putting chamber music in clap recital hall so we can be closer to it, which I think the art form demands, but still the symphony orchestras or the big ballet companies or whatever, the big musicals really work well in here. So the artists know that they're going to have a good audience. They're also going to have a good time. You know, we throw parties for most of the artists.
And that doesn't happen in perhaps many major cities,
very,
does it?
very, very few. And we extend these invitations to almost every artist that comes, and a few will turn us down because of schedule, but not many. And that's a good way for our community to get to know them. Otherwise, it's kind of a ship that passes in the night, and I don't want that. Yeah. My ideal for each event, and in the future I'm actually thinking about doing fewer events, but taking fuller advantage of them educationally.
And with more young people's involvement on the ice?
Well, I wouldn't say just young people. I'd say people of all ages. You know, you and I are a certain generation, and then there are a couple below us, perhaps, or one, whatever we'll admit to. They need to be involved and educated too. It's actually not until you get to a certain age, maybe when your kids are mature enough to take care of themselves, or that you're out of the nest, that you have time to come back. We miss people between 25 and 40. God. That's the toughest age group for us to get in because
they're so busy.
Because of their schedules, they're squiring their kids around, they're making sure their educations are good, and money is a problem too. So that's another of the big fights I have, is to keep the ticket prices affordable.
Let's talk about students in Hancher. You've always talked that you've wanted more students to come. How do you feel like you're doing in that area?
Never good enough. I can't be smug about that one, I can tell you. In the early days of Hancher, our student attendance was 50%. Now it's averages 23, 25, 27% as a regular average. And I must tell you, we work extremely hard to keep that percentage up. We probably work harder at that than anything else we do. I mean, I am in the Division of Student Services at the University of Iowa, so that's considered a prime part of my mission.
You hire a lot of students, don't you?
Well, we have, 300 or 400 a year that work for us backstage, in the front of the house as ushers, in the cafe, and up in my office, in the box office. And, a lot of them go on into arts administration. It's because it's a great education. And I'm teaching an arts administration course in the theater department this fall. So
do you enjoy that?
I do,
like
very
teaching?
much. I do very much. I think I will come back to. I haven't taught a course like this in years, so it's going to be a challenge to try to synthesize it. Your practical, real life experience. But I will let them know what the job market is and how to get a job, and be very practical about it.
I know I read an article many articles about you, but one of the articles said that your goal in life is to keep the arts alive, and now, especially live performances. Talk about this passion of yours.
Well, I think that's the real battle. My hope is that people in the future will want to get together and share a laugh together. I think that still happens in the movies. That people want to go out, because it's so easy to wait a month or two and rent the videotape or get it on your satellite dish or cable or whatever. But there is a joy in a shared experience. I think the same is true with athletics. That big, exciting 70,000 people in the stands, or here 2,500 people for a symphony orchestra. And you can hear a pin drop, and there's cheering at the end if they like it. If they don't, they don't. But Iowa audiences tend to be pretty generous in that regard. But I hope we have a future. I think the challenge will only get to be more of a challenge. I do sense that our audience, even here in Iowa City, is getting older. That the audience for chamber music and symphonic music and classical ballet
is larger.
No, is getting smaller.
It is.
It is. It's going down from year to year, and that is right in tune with national trends as well as international trends. There are some major centers like New York or Amsterdam or Cologne or Berlin, Philadelphia, San Francisco, where there's strong cultural traditions. Here we're so youth-oriented that they're the real challenge to get in a chamber music concert. They tend not to come. So the demographic of that audience aging, getting older, is very much with us right here.
So do you have some plans to get that younger group in?
Well, we've been doing lots of, fortunately, with the help of some good grants from the Lila Wallace Fund, from National Endowment, Iowa Arts Council, another group called Arts Midwest. Been doing educational programs in libraries, in churches, in schools. We now have this stage wired up for the Iowa Communications Network, ICN as it's known, which has 557 sites as of this week, and we can do interactive television with all of those sites, and with Bobby McFerrin, with Wynton Marsalis, with Canadian Brass, we have had really exciting sessions that go out all over Iowa. Now that technology is probably going to change, become obsolete. Maybe the state will sell it, but for right now, it's a really good way to reach kids. And they're so comfortable with television that we'll get our act there,
I know another, besides commissioning, you were interested in encouraging young performers to kind of get their start here, and you've had to cut back on that. Is that you couldn't get an audience for those young performers?
Well, it's a real tough sell. I mean, part of what's happening in our society, which has, I heard that, read somewhere that $140 billion a year is spent on marketing overall in all of the United States, television, radio, print, magazines. We're a very small part of that. It's very hard for us to compete. The Madison Avenue thing is that now is that you have to hear something 8 or 9 times to remember it. It used to be 3. So that's really crucial to me in reaching the public, even in Iowa City, which is supposed to receive like 3,000 messages a day on an average from somewhere, somehow. And I think that's probably true. That may be a conservative estimate. If you're in New York City, it's probably double that. So I have to penetrate through that with our own excitement. And to answer your question about young artists, though, that's getting tougher and tougher. Because this marketing, if you're not in that marketing construct, if you're not on Jay Leno and David Letterman, it's very hard for me to sell tickets. We've had a phenomenon in the last 4 years here of Stomp, this show, which is tap dancing and humor and some really interesting kind of jazz improvisation with found objects. That had its start on Good Morning America, Letterman and Leno. So the kids had heard about it. It had the confirmation of television. So they came. So it pretty much sold out 4 years in a row. And that at least gets them in the door. I do think the future of our culture will all be in hybrids, will all be in fusions of classical ballet with rock music, like we experimented.
Like Prince's,
like billboards, whatever. And Kronos is right on the crest of that. But the whole thing of world beat now that we do so much of is very much, the certain tribe in the Belgian Congo working in a sound studio in Paris with a sound engineer from LA, and they create something new and something interesting, and that's very popular right now. So just the idea of fusion, I think, really appeals to particularly a younger crowd. As long as it has an amplified bass, as long as it has a rock bass, as long as it involves guitars and sound studio tricks. I mean, we can also see all the tricks in movies today. Titanic is the perfect example, which is mostly a computer exercise, with a little good acting, but mostly.
But everybody in the world has seen it, haven't they?
Mostly done by machines. So we are a low-tech thing. Finally, we have some fun event next year coming with Philip Glass, who's bringing his ensemble, and will play live with a 3D movie with 2 70-millimeter projectors back here. It's called Monsters of Grace. But, 3D glasses are 50s, so that's very retro.
So you're going to sell it partially that way?
Partially that way, the fun of the 3D glasses. But Philip Glass's music is some would say, a bit old-fashioned, maybe early 90s, right, 7 years ago. But still, I think he's right on the crest and is one of our modern masters. And Robert Wilson is certainly one of the great theater designers of our time. So that's going to be an interesting various decades that it makes a statement on as we approach the millennium,
I've got to ask you, you've been sitting in this hall for 12 years and often weekly, bi-weekly. There's got to be some performances that you think that still resonate with you. What are they?
Absolutely.
It's hard to pick them out, though, I know.
No, the first one that comes to my mind is a solo evening we had with Yo-Yo Ma. I happen to like him so much. I mean, everybody that has contact with him personally usually does. And he's been at a number of parties in homes around Iowa City and is always very gracious about meeting people. But I remember sitting sort of in the middle back here and there are so many other things that can go wrong at a performance that I rarely have a good time. I rarely relax. But in that, after about 10 minutes of his playing, and seemed to be okay, that I think everybody just sort of leapt right out of time and went along with him wherever he wanted to take us. And that was a genuine miracle for me. And you feel it in your stomach, you feel it in your chest, and that's relaxing. That's the ultimate stress relief, because you really do engage in his artistry and the artistry that Bach wrote, you know.
And it was live.
Absolutely, and it was live, and he apologized afterwards for making some mistakes and stuff, and I just sort of looked at him with tears in my eyes and said, it's okay, you know, who cares? But, and part of the live is that they do make mistakes, they do cough, they do stop and start again, a string breaks, Isaac Stern's bow goes flying over in the third row, you know, things like that happen, and that keeps you on your toes, but that's part of the connection you have with the artist. You do not have that with your CD player.
That's what was so wonderful about live theater too, is that interaction.
Sure, that trade. Yeah.
Yes. So are you optimistic about live performances?
I am in the near term.
In the near term?
To be honest, I think for now we're doing okay. You've heard me say before, I think these are the good old days. You know, our economy in Iowa and nationally is in such good shape that reflects itself in ticket buying habits and in contributions, which are about a third of our budget, grants and contributions. So that's all going pretty good. There are still some artists I can't afford to bring here that I would like to bring, so I'd like to get our endowment up a little bit. But I do worry about the long term, because I do see the growing influence and
the shrinking help from the government too.
Well, true, but that was always about 4% of our budget on an average. And that's just a symbol. It's not the loss of money so much as it is the loss of attention, and that some elements in our society really like, you know, pictures of ducks done by Audubon. And he's a pretty fine artist and did a great service to, you know, nature. But there's a certain cachet that comes with the NEA. And like when the Kennedy family would always endorse the arts and go so often, Clintons don't seem to go that often. Hillary's more involved in the arts than her husband is, but that's missing. And I think the agenda of some of our politicians is to use the arts as a whipping post, and that's hurt us. We've kept going. Our contributions are up. We're not damaged by it yet. But I think whoever it is that wrote "The Technology is Destiny" is very accurate. And we have a lot of high-tech behind the scenes, but finally, as I said before, it's a low-tech experience. It's just you and that artist playing that Bach. So I wonder if someday the technology will take over completely, that maybe we'll be staying in our homes more and more for our work as well as our play. You know, Iowa's comparatively safe, but I think if you lived in Chicago, you might want to stay home after a day of work. It gets harder and harder to get you out, or in New York or Los Angeles or Seattle or wherever. And you know, the work week of most workers is growing, it's not shrinking. So the promise of the Industrial Revolution is a lie, that now we average, what is it, 56 hours a week in most jobs in America, and apparently that's going to grow. It keeps growing. So when do we have time to go out? You know?
And I want to ask, what do you do when you're not traveling, working, to kind of kick back, relax, and pull back from this high energy in this space?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is movies. Second thing that comes to mind is gardening. You know, we have
I bet you not many people know that you like to garden.
Well, I'm the hole digger.
Karen's the planter.
Karen's the designer and the planter, but and I throw all the things in the compost heap. So I do that kind of work, but I'm happy to do it because it gets me outside and it's something else to do. But I do value our place up in North Liberty. It's very quiet. It's just 10 minutes from work, and I don't have anybody else that does what I do that I know of that has that kind of safe haven that we do.
Kind of
most of us do here in Iowa. So that's a pleasantry too.
My last question is, what would you like your legacy to be as Hancher director so far in your directorship?
The first thing that comes to mind is we survived.
Right.
We're still here. As Bill T. Jones would
yes.
say. You know, we're still alive. We kept the arts flourishing. I actually think, to answer your earlier question a little better, that it will probably come to flagship institutions like ours, and in that I include not just Hampshire, but the University of Iowa, to sustain interest in the quality of the arts. Because the dumbing down of our society is going on. It is getting worse and worse. People read less and less. They watch more and more television as every week seems to go by. And most of television is junk. So I think it is really will be up to us in cities like this, in institutions like we're a part of, to sustain our culture. So I would be happy to be remembered as being a part of that sustenance.
Well, on that note, we will end this interview, and thank you, Wally, for sharing your story.
My pleasure.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Hampshire director Wally Chappell. Words to describe Wally are visionary, risk-taker, gambler, imaginative, intuitive, enthusiastic, and very articulate. Hampshire enjoys a statewide, national, and international reputation for offering eclectic and outstanding performances. Iowa City is consistently the smallest town on the tour of almost everything Hampshire books, which amazes people throughout the country. It has often been called, and I quote, Hampshire Auditorium, a light on the prairie. Much of the credit goes to Wally Chappell, his fine staff, support from the university, and loyal patrons. How very fortunate for our community, the university, and the state that Wally chose to work and live here. Wally Chappell is one of a kind.